All right, everybody. So thank you so much for joining us this evening. My name's Crispian Lees. I'm the Head of Education at Advantage Learn. And essentially, you've joined one of our Further Studies alumni webinars with Nicole Boyens this evening as our alum who's come to address you. And essentially, what these webinars are all about is about giving our further studies learners and other people interested in the further studies programs a view into how further studies benefits learners beyond high school, and to give a very relatable perspective from a recent further studies learner, because often learners are hearing perspectives from their teachers and their parents who might be, decades older than them. And it's important also to get a perspective of recent learners that learners can relate a bit more to. Okay, so that's the whole goal of this evening, and we're so fortunate to be joined by Nicole Boyens. I just want to give you a bit of background on Nicole. Nicole is a driven mechatronic engineering student at Stellenbosch University, recognized for her academic excellence. As a former member of the Glenwood House Student Council, Nicole showcased her organizational skills and commitment to her school community. In 2023, she graduated with 10 distinctions and an impressive average of 94%, earning her the title of Dux Scholar. Her passion for mathematics and physics was evident through her participation in the Further Studies Maths and Further Studies Physics Advantage Learn programs, where she achieved 92% for Further Studies Maths and 84% for Further Studies Physics, which is absolutely incredible. I remember when I did add maths when I was in matric, which is the equivalent of Further Studies Maths, I managed 72% in that final IEB exam. So a 92% result is absolutely incredible. Well done, Nicole. And for this, Nicole was also the recipient of our Top Achiever Award for the Further Studies Maths live online stream in 2023. So it's really encouraging to see such a talented individual entering into the engineering industry in studying mechatronic engineering. And we're so grateful that Nicole's come back to address our current learners and those of you that have joined us as interested in the further studies programs. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Nicole Boyens to chat through her journey in further studies. Over to you, Nicole.
I just want to say hello. So I took both Further Studies Math and Further Studies Physics, as you heard, and I originally decided to take them both because I loved math and I loved physics, and I found myself looking for a bit more of a challenge, and taking Further Studies Physics and Further Studies Math was definitely a challenge, but they were still fun, and I really enjoyed doing them. One of my biggest worries with taking them was it's an extra subjects, and it's already on top of another extra subject which I was taking at that moment, which was IT, and I was just concerned that I wouldn't be able to cover all the work and that I'd be falling behind and I wouldn't be able to stay up to date. But since I took the live online with Advantage Learn for both my Further Studies Math and my Further Studies Physics, I found it a bit easier to stay up to date and on track with my work. And so that's why I always prioritized actually attending those online lessons as compared to just watching the recording afterwards, as I found through experience, and trust me, that I work much more efficiently when I'm actually sitting there and there's a specific time in which I need to do that work and I need to understand that content, rather than just watching the recording, because I found myself when watching the recording, I pause, I go take a break, I go relax, and then I don't want to come back and work further. And so my time management was very important, and prioritizing that important work and staying up to date was just all things I had to consider and continually be mindful about throughout my matric year and throughout grade 11. So the start of my further studies journey was a little bit chaotic at first, if I have to say so myself. I was originally taking it at my school through my teachers there. However, I did find a little bit of issues with this because the content was covered, but it was not as formally and as fully as I would have liked it. There were like constantly scheduling conflicts for both myself, other students, and the teachers that were actually giving it. And so I eventually then started taking further studies physics with Advantage Learn towards the end of my grade 11 year, which was roughly in September, which left me little bit of time with a lot of work to catch up before writing the final exams. As I mentioned, I did cover some of the work, but it's not to the depth that was required by the syllabus. And so in the week in October that we had holiday, I sat and I was catching up my further studies physics work every single day. And I would say this is something I would not recommend. Start in the beginning of the year. Do not start at the end. The amount of pressure you put on yourself is not worth it. So that's why I say if I could go back, I would rather start in the beginning of grade 11 with further studies physics. And even with my further studies math, I'd rather start in the beginning of grade 10 rather than in grade 12, which I eventually did. And so, yeah, in matric, I did both my further studies math and further studies physics with Advantage Learned. So I can find nothing like definitively negative to say about it. The content was interesting. I was constantly being challenged on a continuous basis. And whenever I had a question or query that I wanted to ask, I could just ask the further studies educators. As you heard, Roxy was my further studies math educator, and she constantly encouraged us to engage and was encouraging us to ask questions. And she always stayed afterwards to answer more questions that we had. And the same was with my further studies physics educator. It was Tyler Rodriguez, which was really good. And so I am, as you heard, a first year engineering student. I'm currently studying mechatronic engineering at Stellenbosch. However, I do want to obtain a master's in biomedical engineering. The reason why I'm studying mechatronics and then going into biomedical is because for me, I found it's the best way to go around. You can study biomedical at, I think, WITS just as is, but if I'm going the mechatronics route, it gives me much broader view on how to get there. And I have a lot more information and a lot more experience in order to then become eventually a biomedical engineer. I want to become a biomedical engineer as the field consists of many of my interests, such as the mathematics, the medicine, biology. Currently, I am most interested in specializing in neurolinked prosthetics. However, this field is constantly evolving and the possibilities are absolutely endless, which is truly exciting to me. Personally, I found that there were many advantages to taking further study subjects. Firstly, it was a challenging course that forced me to involve better critical thinking skills in order to be able to do the problem solving required to do this course. I also found that taking these further study subjects helped me to excel in my normal subjects at school. For example, the content that was covered in further studies physics curriculum gave me more depth and knowledge about the content in physical sciences. Another way my further studies physics helped me in physical sciences is that in further studies physics, only certain formula are given to you on the data sheet. And the other ones that you want to use, you either need to learn it or you need to derive it. And so my way of studying, I decided, okay, I'm going to learn some, and then I'm just going to know the strategy of how to derive the rest. And so often the formula that I did memorize for the further studies physics were the ones that we just used in normal physics that was given on the data sheet. And so I could just write the test using my already learned formulas rather than wasting time to go check on the data sheet for the right formula. And that just gave me more time to then efficiently write those tests and gave me more time to focus on the challenging questions and then review the test again and make sure I didn't make any silly mistakes. I could also employ some of the strategies I learned in further studies math to the core math. Thus, I could also check my answers in different ways by calculating them in using I know I use implicit differentiation a lot. It was one of my favorite topics in further studies math. I thoroughly enjoyed taking these subjects and learning about these fascinating things. The content covered in further studies math and further studies physics were exciting in different ways. As I mentioned, further studies math gave me the tools necessary to calculate the answers in core math in different and often more efficient ways. For example, yeah, as I said, the implicit differentiation, I just loved it. When we were doing the circles, you had to often work out the gradient of the circle at a point, and there was many different strategies and normal math that you had to use, but I just used the implicit differentiation to check my answer, and it was nice and quick, and I was done. Whereas further studies physics, on the other hand, it covered so interesting topics like that I often found myself explaining and talking to my friends and family about. I distinctly remember telling my sister about how about the different colors of stars and why they exist and why green never can exist in a star. After we covered that section in astronomy, I loved talking about it. I think probably some of my peers got annoyed with me with how much I was telling them, but hey, I mean, they learned some of it too. So at university, I have already been introduced to some of the concepts in the further study subjects that other people are only now encountering at university. So like for half the modules I am taking this semester as an engineering student, there has been at least one topic that I am familiar with. This has helped me immensely as it made the transition from high school to university much easier. So I have more time to focus on other modules that I may be struggling a little bit more with. For example, in engineering physics, we are learning about oscillations and nuclear physics, which we've covered in further studies physics. Further, in applied math, we are learning about static equilibrium and torque, which was also covered in further studies physics. Granted, we are learning more about it and there's more depth we are learning about it now at university, but further studies physics has given me a good foundation to build off of. Furthermore, the content covered in further studies math has given me an excellent foundation for the work that we are currently doing in engineering math, and thus has allowed me to excel in this subject, as well as feeling very comfortable with the work we are doing in. Just to give you a little bit of an example, we recently wrote our A1s and we got our A1 marks back, and the engineering maths, most of the work is essentially the further studies math we did at high school. And so I got 95% for my A1, which I'm very happy with. And then time management. Taking these further studies subjects has helped me quite a lot with just having a better time management. I'm now adjusted to having a heavier workload because I had so many subjects and so many things to do at school. And now at university, I am a bit more used to it. Whereas quite a lot of the other students quite a lot of my friends actually, who didn't take it, have now this extra massive workload that they're not used to, and now they have to now try adjust while trying to like adjust to not being with their parents and all the university life and all that. And then further study subjects has also made me adjust my studying process. So I always in the past used to take full detailed summaries, and I used to type it out because I couldn't study from my own handwriting because I had something against it. And that's what I had to always do, and I had to type it out, and it took so much time. But now, because in high school, when I had my further study subjects, I couldn't do that anymore. It forced me to learn how to take efficient notes, but good notes in class time, and then I can learn from that rather than now taking how many hours afterwards to now make massive summaries. So my piece of advice for the current further studies students is as follows. You must ask questions. That is one of the most important things. If you don't understand something, ask a question, because I cannot tell you how many times I was sitting there confused and I have no idea what this question is talking about. And then I ask the question and then the educator explains it to me and I'm like, oh, I misread the question, or oh, now I actually then understand what the question's asking so that I can actually develop a strategy on how to actually answer the question. Another thing I say, pay attention during classes. As I said, take notes, make sure you understand that work during class time and pay attention and just know what they are talking about. Because if you're not paying attention, you're not going to catch the subtleties in a certain concept or something. And that's why I say that's also something very important. The other thing is staying up to date. I know how difficult it may be because of the massive workload we have, but staying up to date is so important. That's why I know the lessons are quite late at night, but what I always do is I always used to eat dinner before the time so that I had enough energy to get myself through the 2-hour lessons and then still a little bit afterwards to just finish the homework or finish the concept on that work so that I know for myself that I can do it, so that when the next week comes, I can do the new concept. Next, use all your available resources, past papers, the summaries in the actual workbooks for further studies math that has been given to you. How useful are they? They work so well. I always used to be going through that before my test because I go through that. I'm like, okay, this is a brief little explanation. I understand the concept. Move on. Next one. Next, time management. I'm telling you, this was something that I did struggle with quite a lot in the beginning, but once I got a strategy and a way down to actually work hard, but also still feel like I can take a break and relax, it's incredibly important. There's not one right way to do it. Every person has their own way of studying and taking a break. But what I need to say is just make sure you find that way that works for you. And then you must have the right mindset. So when coming across your further study subjects, for me at least, I had to make sure that the mindset I was going into the lessons, writing the tests, studying, or doing homework, whatever, was I had to make sure that I was doing it for me. I was doing it because I enjoy it, or because I want to do that work so that I eventually, when I go to university, I'm better adjusted, or whatever your reason may be. Just make sure that it's not, oh, I want to do it just, or not, it's sorry, it's the mindset mustn't be, oh, I just have to do this, I'm forced to do it. It must be you want to do it. It must something you want to do. So now if you have any questions, can please pop them in the chat.
Amazing, Nicole. Thank you so much. I was listening attentively and making notes there because there were so many gems that you were mentioning there. Ahmed Adam is asking, is it a good thing to see a black screen? That's definitely not a good thing, Ahmed. I hope it's not a general issue. If someone could just mention that for them, they are seeing and hearing us clearly. So we understand if it is a localized issue to Ahmed. I'm sorry about that. Thanks, Rox. All good your side. So Ahmed, what I'd recommend you do is potentially leave the webinar and rejoin it. That might work well in terms of solving that. You know, the classic switch it on and off technology solve. But yeah, thank you, Nicole. I actually have some questions. So I'm going to kick it off. But to everyone else in the room, please, we want your questions. Well, Nicole's here to answer your questions. And so she's got a unique perspective being first year this year at Stellenbosch University doing mechatronic engineering. And you have a really great opportunity to pick her brain as you navigate matric, as you navigate further studies, as you navigate your tertiary prospects and what you're going to do and what you want to do next next year or the year thereafter. So actually, before I get into my question, Arav has asked a question. Let's say you could only choose one. Which would you say was more beneficial, especially for mechatronics? FS Maths or FS Physics? Great question.
Sure. So I'm only first year now, and as I said, engineering at Stellenbosch first year is like a general year, so all the first year for engineering is the same. But if I were to say specifically which one has helped me more between further studies maths or physics, it's so difficult to compare the two because they've helped me both so much in different ways. So as like the math has helped me with the engineering mathematics and like has laid that foundation for that side of it, which has helped me so much. But also the physics, it's like it's helped me with just like the mindset even because the further studies physics, a lot of it was so challenging and it was asked so differently than anything I was used to. I had to now figure it out, and there was so many like you had to work out what they're asking and you had to work out this problem in order to give them that answer. And I'd say that helped me quite a lot in like the eng physics and quite a lot of my other subjects. So I would say further studies physics has helped me ever so slightly more, but they have both helped me so much.
I'm glad you came to a definitive answer there. You were on the fence for a while, but well done. And of course, I also believe both will help. Yeah, and it was brave of you because your further studies maths teacher is in the Zoom room. So I'm sure Roxy is laughing wherever she is. Ahmed is saying, I think physics personally, great. Thank you for that insight. Now, Madinji is asking, good evening, everyone, and Nicole. For medicine, which is more useful, FS Physics or maths or both? So, Nicole, do you want to venture opinion on that? I know you're not studying towards medicine, but do you have anything to
I'm
say?
not studying medicine, so I can't specifically talk about the course and what you're studying in the course, but I can more just speak on what tools the further studies math and the physics have given me. And I'd say maybe physics because of maybe it's the thinking, but maybe it's math. I'm not entirely sure about that.
Yeah, I think it's a hard question, but it's a good question. And it is very cool this evening that we've got Nicole because she's got a unique perspective in that she's done 2 further studies programs simultaneously, which is not that common, but becoming increasingly common. So Madinji, I would also tend toward further studies physics for medicine. Not ever having taken medicine, I also studied engineering, because the maths component of medicine is actually not that high. So perhaps in further studies physics, you are approaching problems more from I don't know, an evidence-based approach and an application to real-world scenarios, which is what medicine is all about, you know. So perhaps further studies physics for medicine, but I think it would be so beneficial for us to find an alum who did both and is now doing medicine, and I think that person would be able to give us the best answer. But good question. I suppose a follow-up on that, Nicole, is how did you manage doing 2 further studies programs?
I feel it was more for me, it was just staying up to date. That was one of the things for me is my 2 biggest things was my time management, staying up to date, and then the other thing was my mindset towards it. It was something that I wanted to do and it was something I was really enjoying. And so because I was enjoying it so much, I was excited to do it. And that's why I could just do the work and I wouldn't mind working for hours on end on the work because of how much I was enjoying it.
Okay. Yeah, I really love that insight from you on doing it for yourself and finding that intrinsic motivation. I think it's so important in anything that you do. If you're ultimately doing it for someone else, you're setting yourself up to fail. But if you can find that intrinsic motivation, it makes everything easier. Who said this quote? It's if you understand the why, the how is easy. But if you don't understand the why, the how becomes difficult. Sachin is then got a follow-up question. So let me just raise it up here. Madinji says, thank you so much for the insight. And then Sachin is asking, thanks for sharing, Nicole. Did you find FS assisting you with understanding of the normal math and physics program?
Yes, I actually did, because sometimes the work, often the work we did in further studies physics was further and more in depth than the work we did in normal physics. And so because I had that further depth, I understood that work better and I could better explain it. One specific example springs to mind is in friction with Newton's forces. There was the one time when we were talking about friction and how when a car moves, a lot of the time when we talk about it in normal physics, there's always been something missing for me. But then specifically when we were talking about banked versus unbanked friction, so like when the car turns around a curve and like if the path is at an angle and that creates more friction, and why they do that in like Formula One, that gave me that understanding. And I was like, oh, it makes sense now. And then my further studies math towards my normal math, I feel it gave me a more like, in the way it didn't give me specific like understanding on that topic, but it gave me the understanding in how to approach a problem in maths. So like if I got a very difficult problem in maths, I've already been doing very difficult problems in further studies math. So the difficult problem in math seemed a little less difficult, if I could explain it like that.
Yeah, no, that makes good sense. Thank you, Nicole. I think the other thing that related to that you spoke of, which I really liked, was how the fact that you'd undertaken a higher load of work actually increased your capacity and then made everything more manageable at university, which is somewhat similar in this. How does it impact your core subject? Well, the level of difficulty is markedly higher in your further studies program. So therefore, what used to be a difficult problem in maths is no longer a difficult problem relative to what you've been exposed to. And I think it's also a really important lesson for everyone that the only way you develop your capacity in anything, whether it's strength, whether it's speed, whether it's your mind, whether it's a subject, is by putting yourself under stress and overloading yourself to some extent so that you build your capacity. Nothing grows in a person's comfort zone, as they say, some people might expect to grow without actually stepping out of that comfort zone, but you never will. You've got to put yourself under a bit of stress to grow your capacity. So I think that's a really, really great insight. All right, next one from Arav is asking, what were your other electives at school?
So I took biology, physics, and accounting, and then I took IT as an extra. And then obviously the further studies subjects.
Okay, and did you take an elective in further studies math?
Yes.
Did you go towards the extended certificate?
Yes, I got the statistics elective.
Okay, you did statistics. All right, great. Thanks for that question, Narav. Markara is asking, how did you manage to avoid procrastination?
The amount of stress you put yourself under lessens the procrastination. I'm joking. No, it was more so, as you said, intrinsic motivation. I wanted to do it, and so I didn't feel the need to procrastinate of not wanting to do it. I wanted to do the work. I wanted to learn more about it. I found it exciting and fascinating.
Great. Yeah, procrastination is a hard one. And you know, these devices that we have, these cell phones and this doom scrolling is such a fuel to the fire of procrastination. I actually came across this interesting technique about procrastination because I think everyone suffers from it to some extent. And what this person was saying was, take a chair, put it in the middle of your room. Don't allow yourself to have your cell phone or anything. And if you're procrastinating on a task or some work or something that you need to do, go sit on the chair in the middle of your room. But you're not allowed to read a book. You're not allowed to look at your cell phone. You just got to sit there. And eventually you get bored. And the better option is actually go to your desk and do the work.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting technique, which I've never tried, but I thought it's an interesting technique. Makara, maybe you can try that one.
And there's also actually something else that I did with the procrastination. If I was procrastinating on a specific task, I decided, okay, I'm allowed to procrastinate, but I have to efficiently procrastinate. So I'll procrastinate on that task by doing my other tasks.
Clever. Okay, a follow-up to that. And how did you manage to balance school and all the other things happening in your life?
Honestly, for me, it was when I'm working, I must work efficiently. If I am having fun, I must have fun to the full extent of which I can have fun, because that was just the way I decided how I was going to balance it, and it worked out pretty well for me. And one thing that I always made sure was very important was just don't get burnt out. Don't overwork yourself. And so that's why I always was, if I was feeling myself getting so tired and getting very demotivated, I was like, okay, you're allowed to take a break. You're allowed to relax. You must allow yourself to have fun, because if you don't have fun in it, you're just going to end up going on a downward spiral.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I also think it talks to your point on have the right mindset, because what I try to really emphasize with our further studies learners is that as long as you are growing through the subject and you are learning, and you're experiencing the positives of that, you shouldn't be too stressed about the marks in further studies, because the reality is that just a pass in the further studies programs is an excellent achievement. Universities know that. Tertiary institutions know that someone who can pass a further studies program has shown that they have the work ethic and the aptitude to succeed in the university context. So I try and highlight all the time, don't be too stressed about the marks. And hopefully by reframing our mindsets towards the subject, that makes it a little bit more manageable, because we're less stressed about it. Okay, another question from Jaden. Hi, Nicole. I understand that you're still early into your first year of mechatronic engineering, but would you say that the content covered in FS Maths and FS Physics can be very useful for engineering relative to aerodynamics?
Well, I do know that we only really start with fluid dynamics in the second year, so I can't really speak too much on that, but I'd say, again, going back to it, is for me, it's always just the skills it's given me is very useful. Rather than just focusing on that actual content, the skills are very useful. But I would say at least it may lay some ground basics of how to approach the problems.
Yeah, good one. Yeah, I mean, like you said, the basis of aerodynamics is fluid mechanics. And undoubtedly, when I studied chemical engineering, we also had a module on fluid mechanics. I know mechanical engineering has a module on fluid mechanics, because ultimately everything is affected by fluids and friction and lift and what that if and all of those things if something exists in a fluid. So from my perspective, Jaden, FS Maths and FS Physics will undoubtedly help you with aerodynamic concepts. That is a guarantee. And then he goes on to ask, and what would you say could be a better elective for FS Maths between graph theory and matrices, statistics, and finance and modeling? Great question.
Honestly, I feel like you would be able to speak a bit more on that since you do know a bit more about the three different ones. But I can say the statistics has helped me because of we're currently in engineering maths. Some of the work we are covering has been covered in statistics already. And so it has helped me in that regard. I'd say matrices would also be very useful, but I can't really speak too much on it because I haven't really covered that work as of yet of the other two electives.
Yeah, it's a good question, Jaden. What one thing just to say to our learners is that we do have an electives guidance webinar coming up pretty soon, especially for our grade 10 further studies maths learners, where we have our statistics specialist, Roxy, our finance and modeling specialist, Andrew Gomes, and our graph theory and matrices specialist, which is either Andrew Gomes or Emily River-Carnac, depending on who can be there, to talk about the various electives and the applicability of the various electives. My advice on the electives is that so when I did it, I did finance. Okay, so I did finance. Nicole did statistics. Okay, I did matrices to a large extent in first year university. So I remember matrices as well. Statistics is very broadly applicable in the tertiary context. Whatever degree you go into, whether it's in the humanities faculty, whether it's in the engineering faculty, whether it's in, which is arguably part of the science faculty, whatever. If you go in the mathematical oriented degrees, you'll encounter statistics in your early years. But in the other not mathematically oriented degrees, you'll encounter statistics in your postgraduate years for sure, because you'll have to do a research project. You'll have to make conclusions that are evidence based, and for that, statistics is useful. So, when I'm sure, I generally say statistics is probably your best bet. But the other aspect to my advice around the electives is follow your interests. Follow what you think you're interested in. Find out a bit more about graph theory and matrices via our electives webinar, or by diving into the further studies maths library and watching a couple of lessons between the various electives, because that's the beauty of that library. You have access to all the electives. And pursue the one you find the most interesting, because generally your ability is somewhat connected to your interest. The more interested you are in something, the better you're going to perform at it. And if you've got a strong foundation in maths, to switch between the various topics later on, it's not a big deal. So that would be my advice on that front, Jaden. Mochau is then asking, good evening, Nicole and everyone. My question for you is, how did you maintain a healthy sleep schedule with your electives and further studies programs? And did you have any extracurricular activities in high school?
So for me, always, I prioritized, as I said, working efficiently and taking proper breaks, but also getting good rest. I always made sure I go to sleep by a certain time. I think it was I always was aiming to go to bed latest 10 o'clock, but if I did push it a little bit later, I was like, okay, 11 cut off. You're not allowed to work past then. You need to sleep, you need to relax, because if I'm not sleeping properly the next day, I'm not going to work properly, and it's just going to just spiral from there. So that's why I was always like, I need to make sure I do sleep properly. And that's why I did, like, sometimes I did leave some of I did leave sometimes a little bit of unfinished work, but I was like, it's better for my health to leave that rather than staying up and doing it and then staying up to, I don't know, who knows what time at night. And extracurriculars activities at high school, I did drama, and so acting in general. So I took parts in Eisteddfods, and then also there's the Trinity London exams. They usually do that for music, but they also have ones for drama. And so I did that. But the grade 8 exam was the one that's usually done in matric. But what I did in order to allow myself to get the maximum potential I have for my results that I get in matric, I did that in grade 11 towards the end of the year. And so that's how I prioritized that and how I did my curriculum.
Amazing. Yeah, I think you touched on something interesting there that I'd like to dive into a little bit. And that is that you became comfortable with not completing certain things to some extent based on some prioritization framework that you had to prioritize your health. And I think that's a really important insight because, and I do think that further studies contributes to that, because oftentimes with very sharp high ability learners who are doing their core subjects, they can quite easily finish everything, do everything well, like to 100%. And so it develops in them this expectation that unless it's done to 100%, it's not done, and I'll be stressed if it doesn't get to 100%. But the reality is, and maybe that's what this aspect of overloading yourself does for you from a work ethic perspective, is it takes you into a place where you actually can't do everything to 100%. And you have to psychologically wrestle with that and realize that, you know what, it's okay. I can do it to the extent that I can do it, while at the same time needing to prioritize the different aspects of my life and my health, to make sure that, you know, I don't go into a deep and dark depression. So I think that's a really, really helpful insight, and the fact that you leant on routine to help you with your load, so that you had time boxes for certain things, and when that was over, you moved on to the next thing and you managed your time, which is really amazing. And honestly, I personally, when I was at high school, my skills in that regard were very weak. And it's taken me a long time to develop those things, but it comes through overload that you have to develop those skills to cope, which is so helpful. I'm sorry I missed your question, because it was way earlier. He asked, "Hey Nicole, what extracurriculars did you do outside of school that boosted your university application?" So you've spoken to the Stepfords, the drama, but this Kanak's question is a bit more specific to boosting your university application. Any insights on that?
I feel like for me, what I did for my university application was mainly my academics was my strong suit, and then I did obviously have my drama, and I did quite well in that exam because that exam is internationally recognized at like a grade 12 level. So if I did do like a theory exam for drama, then I would have like completed matric for drama, but that was also another thing. But then the other thing was just me being part of the student council, and I was quite involved in that. So I was the head of the cultural portfolio in the student council at Glenwood, and so I did run quite a lot of events, and I organized like a talent show or this or that. And I did have that part of, so I had my academics, my drama, and then I had the leadership role, and that was what went on to my application.
Fantastic. We have one last question over here, and then I'm going to move on to closing off the session with just a couple of slides for those of you that have joined us that aren't already part of our further studies programs. But the last question is, I'm planning to study mechatronics after school. For further insight, is there any way to contact Nicole? Okay, we will take that up with Nicole after the session. Can you please post your contact details in the chat directly to the panelists so that we can get back to you in that regard, because I don't see who is asking that question. Unfortunately, your profile is anonymous on the Zoom right. So for those of you that don't know too much about further studies, remember there are 3 studies. further studies programs available: further studies maths, further studies physics, and further studies English, all administered within the IEB's International Secondary Certificate. Advantage Learn is the largest distance education provider of the further studies programs, and you can do any one of these three or multiple with us. And this is what I want to talk to and reinforce, but I have already, because there might be a couple of grade 10 further studies maths learners in the room, or a couple of grade 11 further studies physics learners, or grade 9 further studies English learners in the room, where it's your first year in the further studies programs, and you've just written your first assessments. You might have found the assessments hellishly hard, and you might have a big question mark in your mind around whether or not these programs are for you. And to that, I just want to say, remember that it's all about the challenge and the extension in these subjects, and the work ethic, the mindset, the resilience that develops in you, rather than the marks that you achieve. So I just want to encourage you in that regard. If you are finding it interesting, if you are finding the lessons having a positive influence on your learning in whatever way it might be, then it's worthwhile to stick at it. Don't be too stressed about the marks. They are very challenging programs, and like I said, just the pass in the further studies programs is an admirable achievement. Okay, I think this echoes a lot of what Nicole said. The further studies programs improve your core subject results. They do help in your university applications. At some universities, they can actually count towards the APS score, and they really help with the transition in university. And what's more, these certificates are internationally recognized. So a national senior certificate, your matric certificate, in combination with a further studies certificate, is a globally relevant combination of qualifications. Many international institutions will accept you on the basis of the national senior certificate plus a further studies certificate. Okay. In terms of who should be considering them, if you aren't already part of the programs, learners with a strong core subject competency. So if you're considering further studies maths, you should be achieving at least over 70% in your core maths. If you're considering further studies physics, you should be achieving at least over 70% in physical science. And likewise in your English home language, if you are considering further studies English. Learners who want to better prepare themselves for tertiary study. The gap between high school and university is significant. It's a big transition, and I can also attest to the fact that how much it helped me in that transition. And then, of course, it helps you with your admission by differentiating your application. If you're interested in studying overseas, the further studies certificates also help to open those doors. Okay. Remember, with Advantage Learn, there are the 3 learning streams: the guided online lessons, where you can kind of complete the program in your own time, at your own pace, via studio-produced video lessons that are prescribed weekly. There's the live online lessons, which was the stream that Nicole learned on, where you basically meet in the Zoom classroom once a week with one of our expert educators, and you have a live online lesson. And then we do have an in-person center in Durban, Westfall, for further studies maths, but that's only if you're in that area. If you're on the webinar tonight and you are interested in applying, we've just finished our term 2 intake. Late applications would be considered on a case-by-case basis, but they are not advised. But some of you might be interested into 2025, and you can submit an application via our website on advantagelearn.com. All right, so that's everything that we wanted to cover this evening. Another question has come through. Just to query, the point of FS helping with university applications. At the Stellenbosch Open Day, the acting dean of engineering said that they don't look at your FS, but it will just help with the knowledge you get from it. I'm just a little confused on whether or not Stellenbosch considers FS or not. So that's an interesting insight, Jaden. Nicole, do you have anything to say in that regard?
Honestly, I'm not sure. I don't know.
Yeah, no problem. So that's an interesting insight, Jaden. I think admissions requirements are, well, admissions are always shifting based on the landscape of the universities and the amount of applications that they're getting. But just as showing a degree of leadership by being on your student council and being involved in extracurricular activities, which indicates inability to collaborate and work in a team and things like that. The further studies certificates will undoubtedly contribute to that aspect in an application where they're considering things outside of the strict academic credentials. So my understanding of admissions, just to give a bit of insight into it, is that the primary admissions criteria is your National Senior Certificate, your matric certificate. Have you achieved at the levels that you needed to achieve in the subjects that are needed for that degree program? So your National Senior Certificate, your core subjects. And that's why it is so important for you to do well in your core subjects. Now, at some universities, they will then also, in addition, not either or, in addition, look at a national benchmark test result. UCT, comprehensively across all programs, you need the national benchmark test. Stellenbosch only require it in their law faculties to some extent. Rhodes University for all undergraduates, University of the Free State for all undergraduates, and there's various things. So the national benchmark test is sometimes used as well, all right? But then the admissions departments will look at other supporting information to your application, because the challenge that admissions departments are faced with is that the number of candidates that apply to universities far outweighs the number of seats that are available by multiples more. And what they end up with is a lot of applications that are very similar on the basis of the National Senior Certificate and the national benchmark test. And then they need to figure out, okay, this application on National Senior Certificate is exactly the same. All right, these two applications are exactly the same. Then maybe if we are using NBTs, we'll look at the NBT result, and maybe the NBT result will differentiate those two candidates. But if they can't differentiate on the National Senior Certificate, then they're going to look at supporting information. And the ultimate goal of the admissions teams, and these are month-long processes. That's why medicine applications need to be in so early, because the admissions teams need months to sort through the hundreds of thousands of applications that they get. If it's a deadlock on those criteria, they're going to have to look at supporting information to make a decision. That's where these additional things are going to help you in your application. And the universities know about the further studies programs. They know how difficult they are. They know the work ethic and aptitude you need, and grit that you need to stick with them and complete them and pass them. And those will undoubtedly hold you in good stead in that regard. So while it might not count on the initial sorting mechanisms, in the instances of deadlocks in admission, they need to differentiate between candidates. It's undoubtedly going to help you, because ultimately the university admissions department's goal is to provide fair access to tertiary study to candidates with the highest probability of succeeding in those programs. Because what is the function of a university in society? Further the body of knowledge through research, and deliver skills into the economy to grow the economy. So they want to take on learners that have the best probability of success to actually go and graduate at the end of the day. Okay, Jaden, so I hope that's helpful. Lastly, do you think that a selection score of 670 for grade 11 promotion result year averages will be good enough for mechanical engineering, considering the competition with other applicants? Jaden, is that specific to Stellenbosch? And Nicole, do you have any insight on that?
I just want to confirm.
Sorry.
I'm not really, what is the score of the 670 like in like a percentage wise average? Because I usually work in percentages, so I couldn't really, not really sure where that lies.
Yeah, that's a hard question, Jaden. I imagine what maybe Jaden has done is gone and taken his grade 11 results and applied that scoring system that the universities have. Like if you get an A, you get so many points. If you get a B, you get so many points. And then you sum the points, and if you're in the right points, and then that might be what Jaden is referring to. But Jaden, I can't give you any insight there, and it seems like Nicole also doesn't have an answer for you on that. Mochau, what's the difference between the mechanical engineering and the mechatronic engineering? Nicole, do you want to give some insight into that difference, if you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I always if I'm explaining it like basically, I go, okay, so if I'm looking at mechatronic engineering, it's a little bit of the mechanical engineering plus a little bit of the like electrical engineering. That's how I always explain it if I want to explain it short and sweet. But for me specifically, why I choose more mechanical versus the mechatronic, mechatronic versus the mechanical side, is because the mechatronic has a little bit more of the actual like the coding aspect, where with the devices and that sort of thing. And I took IT in school, and from there I knew I loved coding, so I wanted to pursue that a bit more, and it has that aspect more.
Yeah, nice one. How I like a nice visual understanding for me is like mechatronics is like robots, and mechanical is more like cars and motorbikes and aeroplanes and things like that. That's how I kind of box it simplistically. So there's a lot more control engineering in mechatronics and how to control appendages and whatnot, which is related to the coding aspect. Jaden did clarify the selection score on Stellenbosch engineering page is 6 times your average, minus LO, plus maths, plus physics. Okay, Jaden, that's very helpful clarity. I don't think we still won't be able to give you insight on that 670 though. But I would reach out to the university directly. I'm sure they would be able to give you a great answer in that regard. Okay. All right, everyone, it is 6:30, and that is the appointed time to end the webinar. Thank you for all of your questions. It's been fascinating to engage with Nicole on all of this. And a big thank you to Nicole for coming back and addressing our further studies learners as one of our alums. We're so proud of you for doing the further studies programs too, for that matter, and for going on and studying mechatronic engineering. And we wish you everything of the best going forward. And then thank you to Matt in the background for supporting and setting up the webinar tonight. That's everything for this evening. So yeah, any last words from your side, Nicole?
Just what I just want to say to the current further studies learners is just keep going for it. Just keep trying your best. I am rooting for you guys, and I hope the best for you.
Thank you, Nicole. Okay, everybody, have a good evening. Thank you for your time. All of the best. We're going to close the webinar now.